Please like this video. It costs nothing, thank you.
So now we're going to face a trade war with Canada over digital services taxes. Joining us, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Kevin, thank you. So the president was tough on Canada at his press conference today. The battle is over digital services tax on our great technology companies. I don't know why Canada is being so stubborn. We've stopped negotiating with them, according to the president. What can you tell us?
Well, we spoke with the Prime Minister about this at the G7 meeting last week. We urged them to delay, they were setting a multi-billion-dollar tax bill to our big high-tech companies on the 30th of June. And we said, delay it for 30 days while we're negotiating, and they refused to. And the digital service tax is an extraterritorial, really, almost criminal act, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're taxing American companies who don't necessarily even have a presence in Canada, and so and it's a 3% of revenue tax, not profits, revenue. And so it just doesn't make sense that they could do that. The only reason it doesn't violate our tax treaty with Canada is they're claiming it's not an income tax. It's a revenue tax. I mean, can you imagine how preposterous this is?
That is preposterous.
And we spoke, but anyway, the point is they're going to have to remove it. They're going to have to remove it, and I think they know that.
I have heard the president many times, Kevin, say that only the American legislature can tax American companies. No foreign legislature can do that. And that's what's happening here. Foreign legislatures of the OECD or Canada or whatever. And can I ask you about Europe? Europe's digital sales tax now, is that been suspended? Because I'm reading that the Republicans are taking the so-called revenge tax, 889, out of the One Big Beautiful Bill. That was going to be a tax on those countries that were taxing our companies. Now, is that locked in? The Europeans behaving better than the Canadians?
Right. No, not really. Some of them, yes, some of them, no. But here's the thing, that if you have a business, you set up a Cudlow hamburger store in Canada, and you've got chains across the U.S., that when you make money in Canada, of course, Canada can tax it. The idea is that what happens if there's somebody just has a website in the U.S. and somebody buys a service in the U.S. and all the income is in the U.S., Canada's saying that they get to tax that. And other, France is saying that too. There's something else called Pillar 2, which is a global minimum tax that foolishly Janet Yellen agreed to, that basically said if other countries think that our corporate taxes are too low, then they're allowed to fill the gap and charge tax because our taxes are too low. And so imagine if you're a company that has a lot of expensing, and so on, so you might not pay a lot of tax because you're making so much investment. Well, then they're saying that they need to have the right to level the playing field by taxing us more, imposing a tax, again, extraterritorial tax on us. And so the G7 has agreed to language that they're not going to do this Pillar 2 thing, but some of the countries are still keeping their digital services taxes, and we're going to work really, really hard to take those away too, because again, they're very unlawful. Of course, if American companies earn money in another country, then that country can tax it. But when they're reaching into the U.S. and taxing our companies here in the U.S., that's something that we're not going to stand for.
Sure, I think that's 100% right. Absolutely.
President Trump ending trade negotiations with Canada.
He says he's terminating the talks over a tax on technology firms like Meta and Amazon.
They put a tax on companies that were American companies that they shouldn't, a very severe tax. I guess they could remove it. They will, but it doesn't matter to me. We have all the cards. It's not going to work out well for Canada. They were foolish to do it. And so I said we're going to stop all negotiations with Canada right now until they straighten out their act.
Let's bring in Kevin O'Leary, a Canadian and chairman of O'Leary Ventures. Man, I love this dude so much because he's smart, he's funny, and he's pithy. And I don't mind just saying it. This is, I don't know, we kind of knew this was going to happen, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Is this a tempest in a teapot?
This policy actually was introduced by the previous administration in Canada, the idiot king, Justin Trudeau. It was bad policy then, and it's bad policy now. But Carney, the new prime minister, that Trudeau was thrown out after he impoverished 25% of the Canadian population, wiped out GDP, buried the country in debt because of one policy called Bill C-69, which doesn't allow development of any energy, anything at all. It's a no pipeline bill. So revenues collapsed in Canada during his 10-year reign. And now Carney has no income. There's no growth in income at all. So he's trying to find any way he can to make income. This is worth $7 billion to the Canadian economy, but obviously it's not going to work out the way he planned. Now, he may be just testing it, but he doesn't have a lot of options because Canada's economy has been wiped out by the idiot king, and he's got to fix it. And so at the end of the day, this is just another aspect of the negotiation. But I will add one thing. The original vision of this, way back 7 months ago, was why don't we somehow combine these two economies, not sell the country, but Canada has all the raw resources, the unlimited nat gas, unlimited oil, unlimited rare earth, unlimited minerals, and the U.S. is the largest market. Yeah. So what are we, all idiots? Why do we have tariffs in either direction? There should be no tariffs whatsoever.
Exactly.
We should bulk up and then fight off the Chinese.
You know, my favorite thing that's happened out of Canada recently was when the No Kings protests spread to Canada, and then Canada remembered that they have a monarchy, so they had to change it to the No Tyrants holiday. But, you know, obviously the Trump administration, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also has called out the new tax on digital services that Canada has is going to levy on U.S. companies. Watch this.
Canada has this digital services tax, and several other countries do too. We disagree, and we think that they discriminate against U.S. companies. This was something from the Trudeau years, so we were hoping as a sign of goodwill that the new Carney administration would at least put a break on that during the trade talks. They seem not to have.
Real quick, how does that end?
Well, Carney's pragmatic. There's no question about that. He obviously tested the waters with this. He got a very vicious reaction from Trump. And now he's probably thinking it through the weekend, deciding what to do next, because he definitely wants to get a trade deal done and start to normalize the relationships between Canada and the U.S. It's in both sides' benefit. But if this is going to be the sticking point, it's not worth fighting for this because it is a tariff on tech companies the same way Europe did it. And the majority of tech that's used in Canada comes from the U.S. It always has. And so I don't think this is a winning strategy for Carney. But as I say, there's a lot of optimism around him because he is not the idiot king. He's a lot more pragmatic.
Well, let's see if he is. We definitely have a new president, so that might help in the negotiations as well because he's good at that art of a deal. Let's look at this because in New York City, developers are freaking out over Membani's sudden rise. They're worried that he might win. They're looking at ways to, band together to maybe look for an alternative candidate. Explain why developers are so worried about this socialist winning.
I'm a developer. Let me explain why. Long-term capital. We need stability on policy desperately. New York has been a mess for years now in terms of putting large amounts of capital in the ground because the policy keeps shifting. Here's another evidence of it again. This is around rent control. So if you're building multifamily, which New York desperately needs, and you're never going to be able to increase rents, the economics of the projects don't work. I always tell people this about the competition of states. You don't have to invest in New York. You don't have to live there. You don't have to pay taxes there. And that's why Tennessee, Florida, Texas, and many other states like North Dakota, South Dakota, the capital's going there because of the policy. It's not about politics when it comes to putting capital to work. It's about policy. This is bad, un-American policy. America is about the American dream. New York is turning it into the American nightmare. Everybody understands that, and it's got to get fixed. This is bad, bad, bad policy.
The great Kevin O'Leary, O'Leary Ventures, and my favorite shark. Kevin, thank you for your time. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Take
Kevin.
care.
It is Friday, and Wall Street is craving tacos tonight, or at least more of Trump always chickens out. Because while the president was doubling down on his July 9th trade deal deadline, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was teasing a Labor Day extension. Although Canada should not expect on Canada, our closest friend, our closest ally, our neighbor up north. the president ended trade talks with our neighbors over a tax on U.S. tech companies and said that a new tariff on Canada would be announced within the next week. On that news, the stock market turned negative, but ultimately rebounded, closing at a record high. The nightcap is still here, Heidi. Let's start with Canada. Which Trump are they supposed to believe here? Will he actually come up with a new tariff rate for them when he's basically kicked every other deadline down the road?
Yeah, I think that their new prime minister, Carney, he's got his number. He knows he's not reliable. He says, let's just try and deal with European nations. Let's deal across the world. Then not cut the United States out, because that would be extraordinarily difficult, but to just not rely on the United States. And I think, a billionaire recently said it, that we are a brand, the United States, the predictability of the United States, the friendship of the United States, and he basically erodes away that goodwill every day. But I don't think this is unexpected in Canada. I think they've seen this before, and I think they're going to do their own little workaround. And at the end of the day, you know and I know that if you take energy out, we have a positive trade relationship with Canada. And if you put services in, we're winning with Canada, but the president will never acknowledge that.
Do you think it's personal for President Trump and Canada because Mark Carney is so well liked by the business community, because he is Harvard educated? He's all the things that President Trump isn't. And when they met at the White House, Mark Carney was playing no games, didn't bend the knee. And when the president said, maybe we'll make Canada another state, he said, no, we absolutely will never do that. So do you think the president is trying to stick it to him? Heidi?
Well, I think absolutely he is. If you go back and you take, Stephanie, if you look at why Carney got elected, because the liberals were basically going to be obliterated in this election. Carney got elected because Trump put Canadian sovereignty on the ballot, and Carney cannot politically risk, blinking as it relates to Donald Trump. And so Carney was created by Donald Trump, and now he's his worst nightmare because he's got the chops, the economic chops, to actually do what he says he's going to do, which is divest in a big way away from the United States.
The U.S. does a lot of business with Canada. You and I have talked about the impact the trade war has on farmers in your state. How does this development with Canada fit into this?
Well, I think we should point out that one of the biggest imports into Iowa and North Dakota is natural gas that's used to make fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, nitrogen. And you need nitrogen to grow wheat or corn. And so corn costs are going to go up, which means beef costs are going to go up, and pork and chickens and eggs are going to go up if you can't get nitrogen. And if we can't get corn grown, we rely on Canada for a huge percentage of our potash, which is also a vital fertilizer component. And I'm not sure if it's Tuesday, if it's Wednesday, if it's Thursday, what the status of natural gas and potash are. At one time, we got an exemption for potash, but I'm not sure if that still exists as of today. And
it changes every other day.
Yeah, it changes every day. And so farmers, just like everybody else, would like some certainty. Markets are sliding sideways. Ag markets, commodity markets. Corn and beans were up today. Maybe they're down tomorrow based on this news that he's getting into another fight with Canada. I haven't checked in the last couple hours. But it's just a roller coaster ride. And we've already lost our soybean market with China to Brazil. That was in the last trade war that he started. And so everybody's just holding on to their jockstrap, wondering what's next.
John, do you think there's any chance the president just finds a way to walk away from all this, right? He's now announced a trade deal with China. But the trade deal he announced is basically an agreement of the framework that was discussed in Geneva back in May. So all this back and forth, nothing's even changed over the last 2 months. We're not talking about any real developments. Is there any chance Trump says this didn't work and moved on? Because people are certainly looking at other things at this point.
Well, one thing I can assure you, Stephanie, is he will never say the words, this didn't work, or I was wrong. Whatever he does, he will declare victory, and whether it can be put on paper or not, he will say that he won. There has been enough criticism, just like I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an economist, Stephanie, you know more about this stuff than I do, but no one who knows anything about this thinks that the tariffs are a good idea in the first place. I can tell you, Art talks about the business that Iowa does with Canada. You know, Canada makes up about 30% of the international visitors to Las Vegas, to Nevada, and now those numbers are going down. We just had the figures come out. The gaming revenue here is down. Passengers through the airport here are down. This is having an effect here in Nevada, and you know better than anybody, Stephanie, we're a one-trick pony. This is going to end up hurting the economy, and in 2026, Governor Joe Lombardo, who is a Republican who has tried to thread the needle on Trump, is up for re-election, and he's going to have to deal with that when he runs.